Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
No matter where you practice, there's a good chance that you employ some form of patient financing. And by that, I mean a company that a patient can apply to that extends credit to the patient, pays your practice, and collects the money from the patient to pay off that debt. There are tons of them in the United States. I'm aware of several in Canada as well as in other countries across the world. Now, at first glance, patient financing may seem like a complete win-win for everybody involved. You know, it helps you collect more, potentially helps your profitability, and most importantly, it gives your patient access to treatment that they may not have had access to if companies like that didn't exist. But like anything else, patient financing is a tool, and a tool can be used well or a tool can be used poorly, and accidents can happen. You know, I could have a hammer and hammer in a nail, or I can smash my index finger and thumb. So sure, when it's used well, it's a win-win, but what happens when it's not used well? Well, it can cost your practice profitability, and, you know, at worst, it can actually lower your treatment acceptance. So what I wanted to do in this week's episode, I wanted to take a look at 4 ways to make patient financing really work in your practice. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And look, a couple things here. Number one, I'm a fan of patient financing plans and companies. You know, we work with a couple in our buying group. We have a buying group for MGE clients, and they offer benefits to our clients. The people I've worked with these companies are really great, and they do offer benefits to your patients. So I have nothing against them in any way, and I do think that they're a vital tool to use in your practice. I just think that there's a way to use them, and there's a way to use them which is just not very effective. So let's start off with our first rule or way to use patient financing effectively in your practice, which is don't make a patient financing plan your first payment option for a patient. Now, this is how I've found it's being done normally. I've talked to some doctors about this as well as treatment coordinators where they're steered into having the patient immediately apply for some form of financing as their only means of payment. In other words, I need a $10,000 treatment plan, and your treatment coordinator, when they show me how much it costs, instantly tells me, well, but we have several payment plans that you can use with these different companies we work with to pay for this treatment plan, Jeff. Like, there's no discussion about how would you pay for this, Jeff? Nothing like that. It's just instantly offered up. So I think that's a mistake for a couple of reasons, and I'll get into how I would do this discussion otherwise. But it's a mistake for a couple of reasons. Number one, patient financing plans, and I know this is all over the place depending on the company you're dealing with, can cost a lot of money for your practice. You know, there may be cases where that $10,000 treatment plan is costing you 15% or more. You're eating 15 or 16%, so you're only getting $8,400. And the company's keeping the other $1,600, you know, especially when you're offering a no interest option. There are companies that offer more or less. And again, it depends on how long the horizon of repayment is. Sometimes for a longer payment plan, it's more or less, etc. But either way, they can become very costly. So if that is my only means of collecting, especially larger balances, then that's going to, you know, it'll look great from the perspective of how much I'm producing, but that's a 15% cost, which if you look at your overhead, the only things that are probably costing you 15% are probably payroll. You know, that you're probably not spending that much on marketing or labs or anything else. So that's a large expense. And if a lot of your collections is coming from these companies, that's costing you a lot of money, which if that's the only way a patient could pay, then fine. Better to do it than not do it. But if that's just the only way you're offering for patients to pay, that's a mistake. So the first is the cost. The second problem with this is, you know, if you come right at me, I have a $10,000 treatment plan and I'm given, okay, you need to fill out this application with this. I know you would say it nicer than this. Fill out this application, blah, blah, blah. We could do no interest financing for 1 year, 2 year, whatever it is. Well, what happens if I get disapproved? I want you to play this out in your head for a second. You probably don't have to play it out in your head. You've probably experienced this. So you sent me off. I sit down. I fill out the credit application. It comes back disapproved. So now you're going to have to sit down with me again, or your treatment coordinator is, and say, okay, Jeff, well, what other ways can you pay? Well, keep in mind, getting disapproved is somewhat degrading. Okay, you feel rejected. I'm not going to be very solution oriented at that point. Well, you know, let me go home and look at my finances. Let me talk to my wife. I'm not going to be really excited about figuring out ways to pay because I've just been disapproved. I find that embarrassing, whatever, right? It's definitely not going to put me at the top of my game and keep me excited about getting my treatment plan done because I was just disapproved. So you have the cost factor, and you have the fact that, and look, different companies have different criteria on how they approve and don't approve patients. And I'm sure you've seen cases where you had a patient you were sure was going to get approved, get disapproved, and vice versa. You have this patient, there's no way they're going to get approved, and they get approved. You're not running the risk or credit department for any of these companies, so you have no clue. So you always run that risk. If that's your first line of payment, and that's the first offer you're making, this is how you should pay for this balance, you run that risk. It's the cost and the potential of disapproval, and then the person doesn't want to figure out another way to pay. So how would I have this financial discussion? Well, this is actually pretty simple. Again, you've just presented me my $10,000 treatment plan. And I see the number. And ideally, the doctor should be having this discussion. I've talked about this before. The doctor at least has to tell me how much it costs. Jeff, your treatment plan is $10,000, and I'm going to send you off with Susie here to take a look at the different payment options that we have. That to me is the irreducible minimum. Ideally, what the doctor would do is say, okay, Jeff, here's your treatment plan. It's $10,000. And I might go, wow, that's a lot of money, or whatever I might say. And then you say, well, how would you normally pay for something like this? And what am I going to say? Well, I might say, well, I could put it on a credit card, or I might say, yeah, gosh, I don't know. I wasn't expecting this today. That's a lot of money. Well, then if first off, and this is a rule I've talked about before, if it starts to get into I'm focusing on the money too much and I'm not being very solution oriented, you know that I'm not sold on the treatment plan yet. So then it might be something along the lines, well, Jeff, do you really want to do this treatment? Well, I don't know. Do I really need to do it? Well, then drop talking about the money at that point and get back into the treatment discussion. I'm not closed on the idea of even doing this in the first place. Talking about money at this point is going to be a waste of your and my time. So assuming I want the treatment, what you'll notice will start to happen with me is I will start to figure out ways I could do it or offer up solutions. I'll say something like, well, I guess I could put it on a credit card. I just, I hate using credit cards. The interest rate is so high. Or could I give you, half now and half next month? In other words, I'm going to start advancing ways I could handle it. Or I might ask you for a payment plan. Do you notice I'm participating in this? And this breaks down to the basic reason why you do it this way. If you're throwing at me tons of solutions right off the bat, like you're instantly offering me, 5 different companies I could finance it through, you're not letting me participate in the solution to this problem. And that's a problem because I've used the word problem several times there, because whose mouth is this going in? Because whose mouth is this going on in? It's going on in my mouth. This is my issue. I need to participate in the solution to this. You can't just do it all for me. So you want me to participate in this discussion and figure out how I'm going to get it done. That's one reason. The other reason is if I end up opting for financing and it doesn't end up working out, we figured out another way to pay. So let's play this out again. You've got me, you've talked to me, you've showed me how much it is. Maybe I said I don't know, or I hemmed and hawed. We went back into discussing the treatment. We ironed out questions that I had. Now I really want to do it. I'm going to start asking questions and advancing solutions. Well, doctor, could I give you half down now and half in a month? Or could I put it on a credit card? Maybe you have some type of a prepayment discount. Sure, Jeff, if you put it on a credit card and you pay today, you save an additional 5%. Wow, that's pretty cool. That might even get me if I told you I wanted to put a half on a card this month and half next month. If I save 5%, I may pay it all now, you see, and prepay for my treatment plan. So I'm going to start participating in this discussion, or maybe I just don't have a way to pay, in which case I'm going to say, well, do you have any kind of a payment plan I could put it on? And if you're smart there too, you would then ask me, well, sure, but how long would it take for you to pay? How much could you pay per month? And I go, well, I could pay $1,000 a month. Well, then I'm going to be on a 1-year payment plan. Do you see? So you want to use your head about this a little bit, because usually the longer you run the horizon on some of these things, the more costly it is to the practice. It's just a few different questions that you can ask. But let's say I've decided I could prepay for it, or I could put half down and half next month. And then I ask you, but I really don't want to put it on a credit card. Could we do a payment plan? Well, then sure, we can try applying for patient financing at that point. But now I want you to imagine this rolling forward. So I go apply for patient financing. I have the money available on my MasterCard or Visa, $10,000. We apply for financing and I'm disapproved. Okay, so I'm not going to be happy that I was disapproved, but you've already figured out a way I could pay. It's fine. Sometimes, I've seen people get approved that I didn't expect to, and people not get approved that I was completely expecting to get approved. So it's fine. We'll just do the credit card plan like we discussed originally. You have something to go back to. You're not just instantly pigeonholed into this, because that's what you offered me. All I have is a, patient financing plan. I have another solution that we can back ourselves down to. So to sort of sum this up, and then I want to discuss some of the problems here. Very simple. You've presented the patient's treatment plan. This should be the doctor. You've told the patient how much it costs. That's the irreducible minimum for the doctor. Now, if the doctor wants to take this discussion further, which I recommend because a patient is most likely to listen to the doctor or the treatment coordinator if the doctor is not, the next question after you've told me how much it costs is how you could ask me, how would you normally pay for something like this? Or how would you normally take care of something like this? Whatever is most real to you. And then see what I say. It might be I wasn't expecting it. Wow, that's a lot of money, or I don't know. If we're hedging on finances, let's get back into why I need the treatment and making sure I want it. If I want it, I'm going to start to become more solution oriented, and I'm going to offer up different ways I could take care of it. I could put it on a credit card. I could write you a check. Or do you have a payment plan? Okay. So that's the basics there, right? So in many cases, you'll probably find it really depends on the practice, but in many cases, the person will just put it on a card or write you a check or use their debit card, in which case that's great because I'm not then paying 10 or 15% for that $10,000. I'm paying 2 or 3 to the credit card company, which saves a lot in the long term for the practice. Because whether the person pays via a plan that costs me 15% or they give me a credit card, nothing is going to change in the practice. I still have to pay the assistant. I still have to pay the lab. I still have to, have the same amount of chair time. Nothing changed except that in a $10,000 case, instead of getting, $9,700 with a credit card, I'm getting $8,500 because I'm eating 15% by financing it through one of these companies. Do you see? So if that's the only option, fine, we're doing a payment plan. But if the patient has other ways of paying, that's usually what I'm targeting first. So that's the first issue with this is it can cost the practice a lot of money if everything you're doing is using one of these patient financing plans. After a while, think about it. If you're doing most of your balances this way, let's say half your money comes from, patient copays and the other half comes from insurance, just as an example, and you're eating an average of 15% on these copayments. Well, do the math on that. That's 7.5% of your gross collections. That's essentially what your supplies cost you every month. That can get very expensive. Whereas if it's only, 25% of your patient copays, that costs you a lot less. Okay. So that's definitely something I would do. That would not be my first line of questioning. And I would use it as a backup if the patient can't pay any other way. Which brings us to the next rule or way, whatever, I don't know if we call these rules, ways, tips. Let's just call them tips, okay? The next tip here, which is have lots of options available. So before you apply for patient financing, you want to know a little bit about this patient. So maybe it's your treatment coordinator might ask them, what's your credit like? Do you know your credit score? So let's say they say it's 620. Well, you probably have a company that's going to be most likely to approve somebody with a 620 credit score. Or they say it's 750, in which case you're, using a more favorable, maybe from an interest perspective company for that patient. That should always be a discussion before you have the patient apply, because it can also, number one, avoid unnecessary disapprovals. But number two, you have options. You're not just stuck with one. And this gets kind of funny having multiple options, because I've had clients tell me, this company's not approving anybody. And then the next client I'll talk to will say, this other company's not approving anybody. And I'll ask them about the company that the last client just mentioned. Oh yeah, that's approving everybody. So I don't know. Look, I don't know the credit criteria that these companies use. Obviously, I'm not part of the risk department either, but you want to have multiple options available just so that you have backups, but you also want to have it so you have people across various financial qualification spectrums based upon their current financial situation or condition. That being said, you don't want too many, because if you have too many, it can become a bit of a confusion as to which one you're using and which one you aren't. So that's the second rule or tip. I think we're calling them tips now. What's our third tip? And I didn't even realize this was much of a thing anymore until talking to a few of our power client managers. This is still going on in some offices. We find it with newer clients. which is get all the paperwork done that day before the patient leaves. We've seen cases where, you've presented me with a $10,000 case. I've opted to go with company A to finance my case. You go, good, here's the website. I emailed you the link or texted you the link. You can apply for financing when you get home. That's nuts, because now you're leaving it completely out of your control, right? And, I forgot. It's never going to happen. So all the paperwork and the application should be done in the practice before I leave. Okay. I know maybe it's not a thing in your office, but we still find it happening in some. So if you're doing it that way in your practice, please don't do that. Do it before the patient leaves. That's a simple one, which brings me to the last point here. It has to do with the business side of the practice, specifically your finances. So with this, let's again assume I'm doing a $10,000 case with you. We're using a patient financing company. Okay. And you're going to eat 15% in the merchant fee or merchant discount for that. I'm getting no interest for 2 years. It's going to cost you 15%. So you're getting $8,500. I owe that company $10,000. And if I pay it off in the next 2 years, I pay no interest. And if I wait longer, it goes a lot higher. Okay. So what you actually received was $8,500, but you're going to be doing $10,000 worth of treatment. So, and I found no standard way that this is done. There's no standardization of it in the industry. Because again, I've talked to hundreds of clients about this, especially when I'm delivering our financial seminar. So take a look at how you enter that when you enter it into your practice management software, whether it's Dentrix or EagleSoft or Open Dental or whatever. Most offices, actually, I don't know if it's most, some offices enter it as $10,000. And because they're going to be, when they do the treatment, they're going to be doing $10,000 worth of treatment. And some offices enter it as $8,500 and a $1,500 credit. Okay. Because you're going to be producing 10,000. I'm not saying one way is wrong or one way is right. And this is definitely a discussion I would loop your accountant into, but I want to point out some of the potential liabilities here. So if I enter this as $10,000 received by the practice, well, the truth is I only received $8,500. Let's say I have an associate doctor who's doing this treatment for me. Okay. The associate's delivering the treatment. So I have a $10,000 case that the associate, let's say I pay my associate 30%. So the associate is going to make $3,000 on this case, but I only received $8,500. So if I'm paying them the 30% on the $10,000, I'm not paying them 30% because I only got $8,500. I'm really paying them 35% of $8,500. Do you follow? So that's a problem because then your costs are going to get to be a bit of a problem. All right. But let's say you adjust for that. Let's say you adjust for that when you're doing the associate's pay. Maybe you have some type of a surcharge to account for finance companies of 10 or 15% or whatever it might be. Or your financial coordinator keeps a really sharp eye on these things. So if you were charged 15% for this case, they make sure that's written off of the associate's production. And maybe this one was only 4.5%. They write that off the associate's production. Well, then great. That works out fine, right? But then in your software, right? If you entered 10,000, but you only received 8,500, unless you're accounting for this write-off somewhere, because I'm assuming you use some form of financial software for your practice, whether it's QuickBooks or something else. If you don't put that $1,500 adjustment somewhere in your QuickBooks, which I've seen happen, it'll show up that you collected $10,000. And when that data is exported to QuickBooks or entered into QuickBooks, it'll look like you collected more than you actually did, and you'll end up paying taxes on money you never received. Okay. So that's a potential problem. So you have to figure out how to account for this. If it's entered in your QuickBooks as 10,000 less $1,500 merchant fee, well, fine. Then that works out because that merchant fee is technically an expense. So you have the associate problem. You have the potential financial problem if this is not tracked properly. But then there's another problem, which is if you have any form of a bonus or an incentive system. If we're entering all these things at full boat, 10,000 for my case when you really only got 8,500, right? Well, if you start to do that a lot and you're paying a bonus on overall practice collections, which is something we encourage our clients to do based once they figure out their overhead. I think I did an episode on bonus plans even where I went into this, but we encourage our clients to have some form of an incentive plan, get everybody participating. Well, this can become problematic if a large portion of your revenues are coming from finance companies. I talked to a client who had, I don't know, gosh, I forget the exact number, but it worked out to the amount of write-offs he had to finance companies that month were $50,000. Okay, so I want you to imagine this for a second, that 10 or 15% total of these finance company merchant fees for the entire month amounted to about $50,000. Well, the staff and the practice thought, essentially, because this was all being entered as $10,000 instead of $8,500, like in my example earlier, the staff thought they had hit bonus, and they ended up paying bonus on $50,000 that the doctor never received. So that can get you into trouble, especially if a lot of your payments are coming from patient finance companies. So when it comes to your associates and your staff, it has to be represented that the collections are what the practice actually received in real, if you're in the United States, US dollars, because that's all you can't pay bonus on money that you never got. So you have three considerations there: the associate, the staff, and how it's represented in your accounting software so that expense shows up somewhere. Unless it's being represented as just the net amount that you're receiving. Again, it's a question for your accountant as far as the best way to represent it. I am not an accountant, and I'm, not responsible for that. You were responsible for that. You need to check with your accountant. But I would definitely do this because you don't want to pay taxes on money that you never got. It's just a little bit silly. So those are the four ways. Those are the four issues, ways, tips, whatever you want to call them, that you can employ in your practice to make this work better in the office. I do hope that this information helps. It's a bit of a shorter episode this week, but I felt it deserved its own episode. If you have any questions about this, you can always email me directly at jeffb at mgeonline.com. I'll put a link to my email address on the episode webpage. Or if you want to know more about MGE or what we do or how we can help, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.